Welcome to Sport, Faith, Life, the podcast that meets at the intersection of sport and faith. I'm Brian Bolt, and I'm here with my co-host, Chad Carlson. And this is kind of a special day for Sport, Faith, Life. We're releasing this podcast in the regular audio version on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. But if you want to watch the podcast on video or see a video version of it, we are here on the campus of Calvin University in the studio because the person we're interviewing today is the new president of Calvin University, Dr. Wiebe Boer. Dr. Boer, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really excited to speak with him, and we're just going to dive right in.
So Wiebe, thanks so much. So excited to talk with you. I wonder if you can start by sharing with us a little bit about sport in your life.
Yes, very good question. So I was born and raised in Nigeria, and as everyone knows, football is the most popular sport in Nigeria. So I grew up as a kid playing football, but I was never actually good enough because, you know, everyone in Nigeria is really good. So the sport I eventually took to competitively was actually long distance running. And the way that happened is in grade 4, we were on furlough in Canada. And I went to one semester in Vancouver, one semester of school in Vancouver, at Vancouver Christian Elementary School. And there was a coach there who saw me running in PE and said, "Oh, wow, you have the potential to be a long-distance runner," and started training me. I went back to Nigeria and continued running, and then there was actually some Christian Reformed missionaries there who were big into long-distance running. His name was Al Bierling in particular, and then he took me on it and started coaching me along with others, and so even in grade 6, I was running with the high schoolers. Eventually set the school record for the 5,000 meters, and also was the city champion. Now, in Nigeria, the long distance running is not very popular, but where I grew up in Jos, Nigeria, it's at a mile in elevation. So it's actually the same kind of elevation as Nairobi, as Eldoret, as those places in Kenya and East Africa where you hear of all these great long distance runners. So all the top long distance runners and records are actually made by people from that part of Nigeria. So it was the only part of Nigeria where long distance running was actually competitive. So I was the city champion, and then the couple of times I ran at the state level. Plateau State was the state. The problem was, even though it was supposed to be a 5,000 meter race on a track, the tracks were uneven and different distances, and so it was actually essentially a cross-country race. And there would literally be goats and things like that on the track. There would be people walking around. I mean, because 12 and a half laps, people would get bored. But yeah, so it was an interesting experience. Then I came to Calvin and joined the cross-country team at Calvin. One of the reasons I chose Calvin was because I thought Brian Deemer was recruiting me. And what it was is one of my cousins, because my parents wanted me to come to Calvin, and I, you know, as a typical teenager, I wanted to go where I wanted to go. But they got a cousin of mine to ask Brian Deemer to write me a note. So I thought I had been recruited to Calvin, but when I got to Calvin and went to cross-country training, Brian Deemer had no idea who I was. That first year, I think this is often difficult when you are a high school athlete and you're very good where you come from. When you get to the university level, it's a very different story, right? And so my first cross-country season was a struggle. I mean, I wasn't used to the level of training and fitness. When the weather got cold, you know, there was one day we had a race that morning and I saw it snowed outside and I just stayed in bed. I thought, well, it snowed, we won't go anywhere. And apparently we actually still raced in snow. And so the first year was a bit hard. Then I made a big breakthrough during our first track season. We did a summer trip to Alabama. I don't know if the track team still does that. And I broke my 5,000 meter record by like a minute and a half. And then really broke through years. My sophomore and junior year, I was third man, all MIAA. We won the MIAA championship, went to nationals. So yeah, I actually did decently. At one point, after that, I then went back to Nigeria for a year, and it was at the University of Jos for a year, and actually qualified to represent Nigeria at the West African University Games in steeplechase and 5,000 meters. And then I was told, sorry, you're not Nigerian, you can't do this. And so that was the beginning and end of my international career. And then I came back and did my last year at Calvin. So I competed all the way during that period as a long distance runner, but then went back to my first love of football as a fan, and I remain a fan, and in fact, even did my doctoral dissertation on the social history of football in Nigeria.
We're so excited to hear more about that. It's a fascinating background. Thanks for sharing. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about faith in your life.
Yes. So faith specifically related to sports or just generally?
Faith generally.
Okay, so I am, Calvinist through and through. And so faith is part of everything I do, and it's both at work, at play, at home, at church. And it really just influences everything I do in life. Since this is specifically about sports, I think, what does faith and sports have to do with each other? I think as an athlete, part of being an athlete and training yourself is actually using talents that God has given you. And I often get frustrated when I see incredibly talented athletes who don't work hard and don't push themselves, because it's their way of worship, right? And God has given you this talent, and you need to use it to praise Him. And I think that's why I see sports as such an important part of what we do as Calvin, part of the whole kind of experience here of, there's no reason you can't claim every square inch also in sports. And, sports, I think broadly, you often have this idea of sort of the jock, which isn't necessarily someone that you think of as sort of having a Christian character. But what I love about the athletes that I've observed here, okay, I haven't gone into the locker room, so maybe it's different there, but on the field of play and all that, I see incredibly good sportsmanship. I see incredibly strong work ethics, and a great representation of who we are, and even our football soccer team, even on their logo, it has a cross. And I just think that's really great. And when they're wearing that logo, it should, I hope, remind them of who they're representing, and who gave them the talent they have. And I think it actually makes a big difference in how you are on the field. And you can actually be an evangelist and a minister even on the field.
Yeah, and we really appreciate the way you've already started to connect sport and faith, and we're going to try to circle back to that a little bit. And if you're here at Calvin, you kind of live a life, an open book, right? A lot of people know a lot about you, but we have listeners from all over. So I wonder if there's something about yourself, something about your life that you could, reveal, tell us, something that's unusual, a hobby, something about you.
Yeah, I think most people know all of it. Okay, I guess one thing unusual is that I have passports from 3 countries. I'm a citizen of 3 countries, but I wasn't born in any of them. The country I was born in, I basically can't be a citizen of. So I guess that's unusual. I think usually when I tell people that I have the city record for high schoolers in my city in Nigeria, they don't believe that because I look a little heavier now. What else? I once rescued my baby son from Al Qaeda. That was the part of the speech he gave that he didn't mention, that the people I rescued him from were actually Al Qaeda operatives.
Wow.
Is that good enough?
That's great. I mean, that little section of the speech, those of you that heard the inauguration, I've shown that little section to a lot of people, and so that was Al Qaeda. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. So let's talk about your book a little bit, because you decided that sport was enough of a force in your childhood and in your young adulthood to write about it. I mean, you said, I was really interested in being a footballer, but in the end, I was a runner.
Yeah.
So you think sport, particularly in Nigeria, is a unifying force, or can be a unifying force? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so let me give you a bit of the backstory. So when I started graduate school at Yale to do my PhD in '97, the kind of trend in historical studies was deconstructionism, which was essentially telling us how every historical story told was wrong and should be retold and all that. And to me, it just seemed that there was so many African history stories that needed to be told that we shouldn't deconstruct, but we should construct. And so I asked every Nigerian I met over the 2-year period I was doing my coursework, what is something that is national, positive, unifying, and historical? And the only answer, regardless of gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, education, whether they lived in Nigeria or abroad, whatever, the only answer was football. That's the only thing that is historical, positive, national, and unifying for Nigeria, which obviously is a concern. But it also then gave me a mandate to write on that, which was convenient since I'm an obsessed football fan. So I had one of my main doctoral advisors was a scholar from Gambia named Lamin Sane, who is one of the most world-renowned scholars of African Christianity and African religious history. Very interesting story. He grew up as a Muslim, went to Islamic Quranic school and all that, and converted to Christianity on his own through the Quran because of how much the Quran mentions Jesus. And so he was my doctoral advisor. And I was TAing for him in a class he was teaching in the summer of '98 at Notre Dame. And the World Cup started. And there we were watching the World Cup together. And I said, so Professor Sane, what do you think about if I wrote on football? And he just, oh, that's brilliant. Loved the idea. So he then supported me to take it forward. But the additional piece was, initially I wanted to write on something about the history of Christianity or Christian missions in Nigeria or West Africa. And he advised me that because I grew up as a missionary kid, any perspective I took, they would say I had a bias, right? If I was positive towards it, oh, it's because I'm defending. If it was negative, oh, it's because I have a trauma because of something like that. So he was actually trying to advise me to move away from that. And then when I suggested this, he thought that was a great idea. But ultimately, what's interesting is in academia at that time, and I'm not as close to the African history studies right now, but anything that was brought by Christianity to Africa was always seen as some imposition, right? Something negative. Professor Sane's argument was that it's actually through Christian missions that African languages survive because of Bible translation and therefore cultures. And so the diversity in Africa today is actually thanks to Christian missions. And that's something like 98% of conversion wasn't from foreign missionaries, it was from Africans evangelizing each other, right? However, the story is that Christianity was an imposition, all this. So he said, why don't you write about football, which is actually more foreign to Africa than Christianity. There's no indigenous word in Nigeria for ball. So it's not like there was even something. And then write about it as something that's national and unifying, and see if you get the same criticism about it being an imposition from foreigners. There was none. So it just shows that the bias against imposition is very narrow, and it's based on, it's based on a kind of an agenda.
So that's really interesting, because it seems like football would clearly have been part of an imposition coming from a colonial empire. Can you speak a little bit about sort of some of the origins of football in Nigeria and how we got to the modern day soccer culture that we have today?
Right. So the first football game in Nigeria was played that was written and recorded, was played in 1904. And it was at a missionary school in a city called Calabar in southeast Nigeria. And so it is a bit of part of the story in that in England at the time, the sport of the elite, the sports of the most elite was polo. So that was, if the aristocracy, the military, senior military and colonial leaders, they played polo. Next level was cricket. And then the sport of the common man and the sort of the lower class was football. Right. So what was interesting is that in colonial Nigeria, therefore, cricket was played in the government schools, the government-sponsored schools, and football was played in the mission schools, because the missionaries were mostly working class, right? And so there was actually kind of a class level to it right then, right from the beginning, and that's part of why eventually football took off and cricket didn't. And so most people don't realize this, but in the 1920s and 1930s, cricket was actually bigger in Nigeria than football, but it always not only had this sort of upper class, but also a racial element. There was always an African cricket association and a European cricket association. Football was one of the only activities of any kind in colonial life, in any sphere of life, that didn't have any racial element to it from the beginning. The original Nigerian Football Association was founded in 1933, and at the table were Africans and Europeans. And so it was sort of non-racial, non-divisive right from the beginning, and it was something that brought people together from day one.
That's pretty revolutionary. I mean, when you think about it, right, no other sport really walks through that path or starts that way, and you would imagine that at that time there would have been a lot of forces trying to pull those things apart. To what do you attribute? Is there something about the game? Is there something about the fact that it was tied to mission work? How would you describe why football went in that direction and kind of stayed clear of race distinctions and maybe even class distinctions, other being compared to cricket?
Right.
Give us a thought on that.
Yeah, I think a big part of it was because it was seen as the lower class sport, And so there was less concern of using that as a way to identify us versus you. And it was more than, those who played football were more ready to just play with anyone. So yeah, there was no ideology, it just happened that way. So yeah.
I wonder if you can speak a little bit more to the relationship between soccer and cricket, specifically in Nigeria, where plenty of scholars have talked about the ways in which cricket was racialized and showed class hierarchies in the West Indies, other colonies around the world, where it became popular. Soccer sticks here somehow. You talk about it being the sport of the masses. Was there something about the indigenous culture in Nigeria that would have been more accepting of that?
Right. Well, it's actually broader. So let's even go beyond Nigeria. So if you look at anywhere around the world where the British had very strong colonial influence, then sports like cricket and rugby, which were upper class sports, are more popular. Right. So think of India, very deep British influence and colonial service. Australia, New Zealand, it's rugby and cricket. They play football now, but doesn't have the same level. Yeah. But then the West African colonies was probably where the British had the least impact, and almost all the education was done by missionaries. Then in places like Brazil and Argentina, the British never colonized there, but the British had a huge commercial influence there. And so the commercial folks were they were the merchants, the traders, the middle class. They brought football. They didn't bring cricket. And rugby did end up in Argentina, but I believe that's a different story. So that pattern actually goes around the world. So where football is popular, it's where the British had a different kind of influence than where cricket is popular. And it pretty much, because even East Africa, cricket and Southern Africa, cricket and rugby have traditionally been more popular than football, although it's changed a bit now, but traditionally that was the case. So it's actually more of a global thing. Now, what was the question about Nigeria in particular?
It had to do, I thought your answer was exactly what I was looking for.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
good enough.
Great.
All right.
So let me jump forward a little bit now, right? Because this history is there, and then, like you said, it's described by just about everyone, maybe everyone, as this unifying force, this positive force. What have been the moments in your lifetime that you've experienced that? Because you describe yourself as a football fan, right?
Yes.
Maybe a crazy football fan, right? So,
It's a bit much.
and your eyes light up, right? When you talk about what are the big moments that you remember? We often remember the things that hit us emotionally.
Yeah. So interestingly, I was born within a month of when the Netherlands lost the World Cup the first final in '74. Football was there, was with me from the beginning. But I think the first I remember was Nigeria winning the African Cup for the first time in 1980. So I was 6, and I just remember that was a big deal. The first time I think I was sort of old enough to really be a fan was the '82 World Cup. I'm trying to remember. It was in Spain, and Italy won, and there was Salvatore Scalacci, and I don't know if you remember these names.
Barely, right?
Barely, yeah. But and there was these amazing stories. In '86 was Maradona. Nigeria hadn't qualified yet. Canada was at least there in '86. 1990, when England and Gascoigne, all this stuff. Now and then Cameroon, shocked the world in '90, and then '94 was when Nigeria qualified for the first time, and that was like the best thing that ever happened in my life. Well, not just about, but I was so incredibly proud, and I had always thought of that I grew up in a football nation, but since they'd never qualified for the World Cup, no one else knew that. So I still remember an Indian missionary kid friend of mine calling me and saying, "Oh, I heard that Nigeria qualified. They're going to be a joke." Oh. I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Do you even play football in Nigeria?" Oh. I was like, "Wow, this is what an insult!"
Yeah.
Right? But then I realized, because Nigeria had actually, in 1959, Nigeria beat Lebanon, 2-0 or something like that. Nigeria didn't play outside of Africa at the senior level until before the '94 World Cup. So they actually weren't known out there. They had won some junior World Cups and things like that. So there was a reason why that guy just didn't know Nigeria was a football nation. So '94 in January, Nigeria won the African Cup for the second time. So they were ranked 5th in the world when the World Cup started. No African country's ever gotten close to that. And this was just like this team. I mean, think I was 20 years old when, at that time. So that's like, we had Jeje Okocha, Amokachi, Amonike, Finidi, Olise. Oh my, these are still national heroes, right? And these guys went to the World Cup and just shocked the world. 3-0 defeat of Bulgaria. The best debut game for any team ever in the World Cup. And I still remember watching it at a friend's house in East Grand Rapids, because I was here at the time. And I still remember, and there were 2 Bulgarian guys who were students at Calvin who had also grown up in Nigeria. So we were all watching it together. And there was obviously trash talking and all that. And that's part of what's great about it, right? And so I still remember that game. And the first goal scored by Rashidi Yakini, the first ever Nigerian goal in the World Cup. You may have seen this image. He goes to the back of the net and he grabs the net like this, and then he shakes it like this, and it's still like an iconic photo. Later, my dad looked at it and thought it was a photo of about liberation from African bondage. And I was like, Dad, it's not, this is about football. But it was celebration, it was joy. It wasn't, and then I believe Amokachi and Amunike scored. So these guys are heroes. And then the next game was Argentina. It was actually Maradona's last ever game, because he got caught for drugs after that again and then was thrown out forever. And Nigeria, I believe, Samson Siasia scored. See how I still remember this stuff?
You do.
And then 2 goals by Claudio Caniggia. Both of them, if I remember, were based on really dirty free kicks that basically Argentina took the free kick before the ref blew the whistle. But the refs were always going to favor Argentina. So we're still bitter.
Yeah, I can see you're over it.
I'm not. So Argentina beat us in the 2002 World Cup, 2010 World Cup, 2014, and 2018.
Always Argentina, you're right.
Okay. Nigeria's been in the World Cup 6 times, and 5 times Argentina was in the group. We've lost 5 times. Argentina beat Nigeria in the 2005 Under-20 World Cup, 2008 Olympic final. So it's
pretty bad.
Yeah. So that was 94. Then we beat Greece, went to the second round, took Italy into overtime, almost beat Italy, and then just kind of naivety of these players at that level, and they ended up knocking us out. And then Italy went on to the final. Then 96, Nigeria won Olympic gold, shocked the world. So that was like the first African team to win something at that level. And those were probably the 2 greatest moments.
Yeah. Those are great moments, right? And they go back and sorry to cut you off there. But I'm just wondering, what do you think of the state of Nigerian? You're talking about men's, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I don't know, maybe you want to refer to women's
and there is
football.
A chapter in the book on women's football. So women's football in Nigeria has actually been far more successful than men's, and so the Nigerian women have been in every World Cup, and they've won the African Cup 10 of 13 times. So they're actually the most dominant women's team on a continental level. Because even in North America, Canada and the U.S. are a bit balanced now, right? But Nigeria has just cleaned up in terms of that. They've been in, I believe, every Olympics, every women's World Cup since it started. It started in 1991.
And is that because the clubs are strong?
I think
how would you describe why they're elevating themselves?
I think it's natural athleticism.
All right.
It really wasn't like there was a particular focus on women's football. I think where Nigeria has done really well is where it's just natural talent, and where organization and technical ability doesn't matter. That's why we've won 5 under-17 World Cups, and very few of the players who win those World Cups actually go on.
Yeah.
To do, there's some, like Victor Osimhen of Napoli now was from one of those teams, Kelechi Iheanacho, some of these guys. But the women's game, so I think for the women in Africa, it was just the natural talent was better. It wasn't any particular, it was almost like we were lucky and we were just better. But that's why then every time the women would go to a World Cup, they would normally get knocked out. Except 99, they went to the quarterfinals. And the last World Cup, they went to round of 16. Yeah, but women's football is actually, but because football is often seen in a Nigerian context as a men's game, the women kind of get second treatment, even though they're more successful. But when some of the big women's games have filled stadiums, 40, 50,000 people, so it's quite impressive. Yeah.
You've written about stories, heroes, and epics.
Yes.
But you're clearly not just a scholar of sport, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking with the leader of the flagship institution for the Christian Reformed Church, who's crazy for sports.
Yes.
I'm getting goosebumps. I can't even imagine what this is doing to you, Brian.
We're having a good time over here.
I love this.
Let's go.
I love this. And I want to ask you about someone that might not love this so much and say, it's just sport.
Yeah.
Why are you spending so much time thinking about, why did you write your dissertation? You know, why do you love it so much?
Right. Well, I told you already why I wrote my dissertation.
True.
You know, but as in like why I'm so supportive of sports here, or generally?
Yeah, you're listing these names that only a crazy mad fan of African soccer would be able to name.
Every Nigerian knows these names.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
your World Cup knowledge, your history of all of that is greater than most Americans. Obviously, greater than most people on this campus, probably.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I would imagine like I know nothing about American football, and you could probably tell me who won the Super Bowl 21 years ago. Right, and maybe who threw the
I'm probably still mad about it.
Winning touchdown. Yeah, and you're probably still, but I have no idea. So I think it's also.
Are you trying to downplay how much you love sport? Is that,
no,
is that
no,
what
no.
you're
I'm
doing?
just saying that I think everybody loves sports.
Okay.
I actually think it's pretty common, especially in this community. I found. I mean, you know, there are fans out there watching football here, soccer here, you know, in terribly cold weather and windy and all that, and they're still out there supporting. So I think this community is generally pretty supportive of sports. Maybe not as focused as mine has been, but I think generally there's a lot of support here. So yeah,
okay, that's great.
Yeah,
yeah. So I think, I mean, for us, this has been great for us to hear that. And I wonder, this is a little parochial, but I'm just wondering, like, tell us a little bit about how you see your role as a president, as it intersects with sport. You know, just the variety of different sports here at Calvin or at a university. But also, like, how you see speaking into that integration of faith into sport from your position.
Yeah, no, I talked about it earlier about how I want our athletes to see themselves as evangelists. Don't swear on the field. Don't get mad at the ref. You know, and hold, you know, and just know that you are there representing this Christian university. And I think we can be an amazing witness that way. But like I said, it's also, you know, the act of sport and the act of exercise and fitness is all about, you know, taking care of our bodies as temples. So there's so many elements that, you know, maybe the Bible doesn't directly talk about sports, but, you know, it basically, there's a lot of things that it speaks to, right? So I think it's that part about sports can be a ministry, but then also our coaches, and you're one of them, from what I understand, and my coach, Brian Deemer, was, you know, between him, he was one of my major influences on campus. I spent more time with him than I did any of my professors. I traveled with him, you know, meets and all that, and so he was a witness to me as a strong man of faith, and someone who demonstrated by leading by example of what it meant to train and work hard and be committed and lead. And the way that he was a witness to us and to other teams, other coaches, he was always, he never got angry. Even, I mean, when things weren't fair, he spoke out for us, but he didn't, you know, I heard other coaches swearing, I never heard him swearing. It was always like he was a motivator and a man who knew he was a symbol and he was representing something greater. And that's what our coaches here do as well. And it also means that then the student experience, the students that go through, you know, they get faith and learning in classroom, but then that means they also get it out on the field. And I think it reinforces and it just makes it a better experience.
Well, Brian Deemer, who recently retired, really was a great example of coaching here at Calvin, and we really have I'm just privileged to work with a group of coaches that are really dedicated to their craft, dedicated to the integration of faith in the work that they do, and we're really excited to go on into our next chapter here at Calvin, but also really excited about the World Cup. Let's close out. Do you have a favorite?
Well, I have a least favorite. Let me say that. So Ghana has been absolutely terrible for the last 4 years, right? They played one incredibly good game and knocked Nigeria out of the World Cup, and I am still bitter. I was actually at the game in Abuja in the stadium when they lost. Well, it was actually a 1-1 draw, but because it had been 0-0 in Accra, and they basically qualified on away goals rule. So it was in the Abuja National Stadium. 60,000 capacity. There were clearly 80 to 90,000 people there. There was no safety, no nothing.
Yeah.
And the Nigerian fans came out in huge numbers to support the team and create the atmosphere that they needed. There were literally about 50 Ghanaian fans, as in
Really?
50 people wearing Ghanaian jerseys with flags. There may have been a few others who just didn't want to admit it. But there was basically 80,000 Nigerian fans, very vocal, cheering the team on. So the team had everything they needed to win. All they needed was one more goal. And our team was way better than Ghana in terms of the quality of the players on the pitch. But Thomas Partey played the game of his life. And he's from Arsenal, which is, the problem is I'm an Arsenal fan. But Thomas Partey played the game of his life and just masterminded the whole game. And they won. Now, I left the stadium at the 83rd minute because I could see what was coming. Because I knew that if we were knocked out of the World Cup, there was no security, there was no anything. And so I left. But yeah, it did turn out to be chaos. And, and in the end, okay, Ghana outplayed us, so we have to accept that. But it's still painful. So I know we have lots of Ghanaian students at Calvin, so I'm sorry. But I do hope Ghana gets knocked out quickly. I'm hoping for Senegal to do really well. I think Senegal will do better than any other African team ever. As long as Sadio Mane is fit for game 2. I don't think he can play game 1. Obviously, I want the Netherlands to win. We've lost 3 finals, lost 2 semifinals. So we've been in 5 semifinals.
Yeah.
We're the best team ever to not win the World Cup, and it's time. So I think the Netherlands will do well. I think we have a pretty balanced team. Van Dijk is not in the form he was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but I still think he's the general that can take us there. As long as Argentina or Ghana don't win, I'm actually okay. Yeah.
Well, sitting next to a guy from Hope, we're not very familiar with kind of rooting against your rival. We would never do that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, but what I do say is that it's only during the World Cup that we can cheer for the Dutch and the orange and blue. So, yeah.
That's the only time.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
We'll take it anytime you want to do that.
That's fine. All right. Yeah.
President Boer, thanks so much for spending a little time with us. Thanks for writing this book, and thanks for your enthusiasm for sport, for football, and for all the work that you've done so far to elevate sport here at Calvin's campus.
Thank you very much. Thank you.